story? Yeah, it's a good one. It's a good one, and you can help with this story because there's certain words for this story. Whenever the first time you're going to hear me say, click, clack, moo, click, clack, moo, clickety, clack, moo, then you're going to hear that a few times. You can join me in saying that. So let's just practice it once. Click, clack, moo. Click, clack, moo. Clickety, clack, moo. Okay, this is a story called Click, Clack, Moo, Cows That Type. And I know that I do not have this projected on the screen for all, but I'm sure the grown-ups can use their imagination really well. Farmer Brown has a problem. His cows like to type. All day long he hears, click, clack, moo. Click, clack, moo. Clickety, clack, moo. At first he couldn't believe his ears. Cows that type? Impossible. Click, clack, moo. Click, clack, moo. Clickety, clack, moo. Then he couldn't believe his eyes. There's a note on the barn door, and it reads, Dear Farmer Brown, the barn is very cold at night. We'd like some electric blankets. Sincerely, the cows. It was bad enough that the cows had found the old typewriter in the barn, but now they wanted electric blankets. No way, said Farmer Brown. No electric blankets. So the cows went on strike. They left a note on the barn door. Sorry, we're closed. No milk today. Yeah. No milk today, cried Farmer Brown. In the background, he heard the cows busy at work. Click, clack, moo. Click, clack, moo. Clickety, clack, moo. The next day, he got another note. Dear Farmer Brown, the hens are cold too. They'd like electric blankets. Sincerely, the cows. The cows were growing impatient with the farmer. They left a new note on the barn door. Closed. No milk, no eggs. No eggs, said Farmer Brown. Oh, and in the background he heard them. Click, clack, moo. Click, clack, moo. Clickety, clack, moo. Cows that type. Hens on strike. Whoever heard of such a thing? How can I run a farm without milk and eggs? Farmer Brown was furious. He got out his own typewriter and he said this. Dear cows and hens, there will be no electric blankets. You are cows and hens. I demand milk and eggs. Sincerely, Farmer Brown. Gee, he strikes a hard bargain. So, Duck was a neutral party, so he brought the ultimatum to the cows. The cows held an emergency meeting. All the animals gathered around the barn to snoop, but none of them could understand moo. All night long, Farmer Brown waited for an answer. Duck knocked on the door early the next morning. He handed Farmer Brown a note. Dear Farmer Brown, we will exchange our typewriter for electric blankets. Leave them outside the barn door and we will send Duck over with the typewriter. Sincerely, the cows. Yeah. Farmer Brown decided this was a good deal. He left the blankets next to the barn door and waited for Duck to come with the typewriter. The next morning he got a note. Dear Farmer Brown, the pond is quite boring. We'd like a diving board. Sincerely, the ducks. And this time it was click, clack, quack. Click, clack, quack. Clickety, clack, quack. And the last picture, of course, is the duck diving off the diving board. So, of course, this is a story about using your voice to make change, which is one of our important principles as Unitarian Universalists. And of course, that's why grown-ups vote, because we have a voice and a vote.
A time like this demands great leaders.
Leaders whom the lust of office does not kill.
Leaders whom the spoils of life cannot buy.
Leaders who possess opinions and a will.
Leaders who have honor.
Leaders who will not lie.
Leaders who can stand before a demagogue and damn treacherous flatteries without winking.
All leaders, sun-crowned, who live above thought in public duty and private thinking.
Yesterday morning, I had an interesting experience as I walked around the holiday boutique featuring crafts and food from 5 different congregations, including this one. The buzz was congenial as shoppers and volunteers chatted and complimented each other on their handiwork. And it struck me how this very gathering would not have been possible 463 years ago. For here in this room together were Presbyterians, Congregationalists, and Unitarian Universalists. Back in the 1500s, we wouldn't have even been talking to each other, let alone enjoying each other's company. Such were the tensions during the Reformation in Europe. After all, John Calvin, the spiritual leader of the Calvinist Presbyterians, burned at the stake our Unitarian ancestor, Michael Servetus, over doctrinal differences. What a difference 463 years make. We can tell a different story now. So yes, the stories that we know and choose to believe do make a difference in our lives. Sometimes the stories can help us understand where we've been and how we might want to be moving forward. So today we're just going to look back in time at some stories as we kick off our month of studying the spiritual theme of story. Now the first part of our story goes all the way back to the early days of the Christian faith, when small house churches were popping up throughout the Mediterranean region. These churches didn't focus on doctrinal tests of belief, but rather how they lived together in love. These early Christians lived in a state of radical love, setting their welcome table with all kinds of people, including people who had been denied the dignity of responsibility in shaping policies of either the church or state. People like fishermen, artists, women, and slaves. They sought to create communities that they believed were demanded by the radical accepting love that they learned from Jesus. And they took that responsibility as a very strong part of what they were all about as Christians. And so these folks not only created their own churches, but they took responsibility for creating charitable organizations. These things didn't exist in the Roman Empire before that. They created employment bureaus. They created vocational education for orphans and other charities. All this was happening in the 1st and 2nd centuries after the death of Jesus. It was the unfolding of the Christian concept of agape love, meaning the concern under God for the good not only of self, but for the other and for the community at large. The impact of these communities and their charitable organizations cannot be underestimated. When the Roman Empire fell, it was these early Christian institutions that helped rebuild some semblance of civilization in the wake of the Visigoths and the other invaders. Historians believe it would have taken several more centuries for them all to recover in that part of the world if it had not been for these Christian groups. But, of course, the plot thickens. Once you have Christianity getting fully co-opted by the Roman empires and then others to follow, yeah, the story changes. It became a tool of empire, a test of loyalty, and a perversion, truly a perversion of the original faith that was based in lived practice, not in proper right belief. It became entwined entirely with authoritarian power. And we've seen this in the history of Roman Catholicism, the Eastern Orthodox faiths, and the right wing of the Reformation, the Lutherans and the Calvinists. But there was a left wing of the Reformation, the Radical Reformation. Seriously, there's such a thing, the Radical Reformation. And it's sometimes referred to as the Free Church tradition. This church tradition sought to reclaim the original radical love of the early Christian church. They were anti-authoritarian, demanding a church in which every member, every single person out there, guided by the Holy Spirit, would have the privilege and responsibility of interpreting the gospel and in assisting in creating the policies and life of the congregation. As Unitarian theologian James Luther Adams puts it, they wanted radical laicism, the priesthood and the prophethood of all believers. Some of these free churches came to be called by names that you will recognize: Unitarians, Universalists, Congregationalists, for starters. There were others as well. Adams explains that out of this notion of the priesthood and prophethood of all believers came some principles that might sound familiar to you: local autonomy, free discussion of ideas, rejection of coercion and the ideal of uniformity, protection of minorities, and the separation of church and state. Yeah, as we are here in Utah. Power and responsibility. Sorry, the devil made me do that. Power and responsibility were not to be held by a few people in power, but dispersed and shared. Some new churches were born out of this concept, And the beginnings of democracy started to take shape in the context of these churches in England and the Netherlands, and yes, eventually America. This new concept of church and the responsibility of people to fully participate not only influenced Alexander Hamilton, Thomas Jefferson, and other early American leaders as they created our nation, but it also set an important pattern, one of the defining characteristics of a democratic society, the idea of voluntary association. Organizations that work for social reform, or perhaps cooperative production or distribution of goods, the protection of civil rights and workers' rights, think labor unions, and the maintenance of professional standards, professional organizations. All of this comes from that concept of voluntary association. These kinds of organizations stand between the individual and the state, keeping power in check, assuring that love and compassion is at the center, that the individual liberties are used for the common good. Think of this whole free church thing as the classic freedom with responsibility writ large. Now, all the way back in 1953, this same Unitarian theologian, James Luther Adams, saw the American movement toward authoritarianism in churches and in society at large, which he believed was a danger to the free church as well as to a free American society. Back in '53, he advocated for a neo-radical reformation to creatively resist the patterns of domination and rigidly conformist obedience that he saw taking shape in the 1950s. He emphasized the importance of personal and collective responsibility in society based on the common good, not on right belief, either in churches or by the state. According to, he was looking at, think of this context. That is when Joseph McCarthy was holding all those hearings about accusing people of communism. And there was a pretty strict moral code about churches. So this is what he said in 1953, because I think his words, his actual words, are just as powerful today as they were then. This is what James Luther Adams said. It is just here, then, that we encounter our peculiar responsibility in society. The responsibility to offer a church in which there is an explicit faith in the community-forming power of God, a practice of the disciplines of liberty, and eliciting of the participation of our own membership in creative fellowship. From such a fellowship, concerned to extend the community in which all persons may be encouraged to make their own contribution, our own members can meet their social responsibilities by expressing them in other areas of life: the state, the family, the school, the voluntary association, and industry. This is the response to love, the love that will not let us go. The movement of the patterns of responsibility from the church to other areas of life, as we have seen, has taken place since the very beginning of our free Christianity. It is our social responsibility to maintain and extend this movement in the face of human needs for shelter, health and shelter, and for a world in which, across lines of race, class, and nation, all may enjoy their God-given dignity and responsibility for a world in which everyone can make a contribution. In our times of trouble, the problems are vast in their dimensions. But they were vast in the birth period of the primitive church, and in the birth period of the free churches. To cringe and despair is to despair of the divine promise. It is to forget that responsibility is a response to the Spirit that is given to us, to the light that is shown and still shines in the darkness. So you may be thinking, well, gee, the title of this sermon was "What Serves This Nation?" What is she talking about? What does this have to do with that? Everything. Everything. What serves our nation right now? What serves is that for each of us, and I truly mean each and every one of us, to accept our responsibility as inheritors of this free church tradition and as inheritors of a nation that is still very much in progress. And so you might be wondering, well, what would it mean to accept our responsibility in our nation today? Well, the very first responsibility is to vote. For heaven's sake, if you haven't done so already, what are you waiting for? And I have it on good authority that if you have not voted yet, and you're thinking, okay, I'm going to vote on Tuesday, I have a clue about where to go. At least here in Weber County. I can only speak Weber County. The parking is easiest. Seriously, parking is easiest at the D Center, at the Technical College up on Washington Boulevard, and there is a drop-off window at Ogden City Hall, down here, right on Washington and 25th there. You don't have an excuse. Do it. Seriously, if you haven't gone there yet. And if you're not sure, just think about your values. It'll make it very obvious. For just about everything, except those doggone constitutional amendments. Woo! Yeah, I had to study up on those, and I'm still not sure what I voted for. But the thing is that beyond the voting, I'm drawn to the older story of the original Christians as institution builders who took care of the needs in their communities. That means stepping up. Whether it's participating in creating new organizations like the Interfaith Family Promise Program that will hopefully help alleviate some suffering for homeless families here in Ogden. Or perhaps it's by putting your mark in established institutions like serving on local task forces that address diversity or air pollution challenges. There are lots of ways to get plugged into these things in our community. It means working for political candidates that support your progressive values, and I would like to have us all give a round of applause to our members who've been working on campaigns. If you've been working on a campaign, please stand up. Seriously. If you have a yard sign, that counts too. It also means things like lobbying down at the state capitol, perhaps on behalf of our lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender communities, but other things that concern us. It means showing up at things like those community discussions about race. It means supporting the Standing Rock Sioux water protectors in North Dakota. We've been sending out information to you on that. It means caring for your own property and taking good care of it. And it means knowing your neighbors and caring for them. It means not being a bystander in our nation, but fully engaging and taking responsibility for the common good. And for some, it does mean deeper service. Actually working in the public sector, serving the local community as a public servant. Or perhaps serving in organizations like AmeriCorps. And for some, it means running for city council or local school boards. Being the tall leader, sun-crowned, who lives above the fog in public duty and private thinking, as Martin Luther King admonished us. Yeah, I would love to see some Unitarian Universalists out there in public office in this town. Seriously. And yes, there's another way to serve. For some, it means military service. We are ever grateful for those who choose to serve in this important role in protecting our nation. The ultimate responsibility is a very serious one, requiring much of those who choose to give in this particular way. With Veterans Day coming up later this week, I would like to take this occasion to honor the veterans who are among us. So, by branch, please stand if you have served in the military. We'll start with Army. Anyone? Navy. You can remain standing. Navy. Air Force. Marines. Coast Guard. Please remain standing. And now, if you have spouses, partners, parents, siblings, or children that have served or are currently serving, please stand. We thank you, veterans, for your service and for the dedication of families who support their military members during their time of service and afterward without fail. Blessings for all of you. Serious. Our legacy as a people who seek to bring about the realm of love is long and deep, stretching all the way back to those first days after Jesus walked the earth. Democracy, from this free church tradition, lives very, very, very deep in our bones. Let us continue the honorable free church sensibility that gave birth to democracy by fully accepting our responsibility as individuals and our collective responsibility as a congregation. May we rise to the occasion. Heaven knows our country will be needing us in the days to come. Let's make a difference and be inspired by that original, radical love that spoke to people's hearts so deeply over a millennia ago. May it be so.